Everyone abandoned the weak alien species known as the Zarantine, leaving them to be butchered and enslaved by the brutal Krill. Everyone except the humans. Philip Phillips, grizzled war veteran, jolted awake in his cramped bunk aboard the human ship Magellan. Ear-splitting proximity alarms wailed. He struggled into his jumpsuit, raced to the bridge. Captain Hernandez delivered the grim news. Long-range scanners showed dozens of Krill warships attacking a nearby planet, slaughtering the inhabitants. Phillips paled, mind flashing to his own battles against the Krill's living ships that stripped worlds of resources and enslaved entire races. "We have to help them!" "We're just an exploratory vessel, Phillips, not equipped for a fight." "So we do nothing. Let them die?" "Control your savior complex." Hernandez turned back to his console. "We're leaving." Phillips stormed off in disgust as Magellan accelerated away from the besieged Zarantine homeworld. Hours later, he watched the news in his quarters, gripping his armrests in white-knuckled rage. The primitive Zarantine cried out for aid, begging the galaxy to save them from Krill enslavement and extinction. But no spacefaring race answered. Pundits callously declared that a species unable to defend itself didn't deserve to survive. Phillips punched the wall until his knuckles bled. The Zarantine's plight resonated deeply. He knew firsthand the Krill's brutality, and he knew that abandoning the Zarantine to their fate was wrong. If no one else in the galaxy would help the Zarantine, then humanity would have to. The Magellan needed to turn around and fight, no matter the odds. The alternative, doing nothing while an entire race was wiped out, was unthinkable. Phillips would find a way to convince Captain Hernandez to face down those Krill warships. The Zarantine would not stand alone, not while humanity still drew breath. Months passed since Phillips's unheeded protests against abandoning the Zarantine. Life aboard the Magellan settled back into monotony until Captain Hernandez called an all-hands meeting. "We've been ordered to return to Earth immediately. No explanation given." Hernandez's brow furrowed with concern. "Prepare for hyperspace jump." The blue swirl of hyperspace filled the viewports. Phillips felt a growing unease. Something big was happening. As the Magellan dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, shocked gasps filled the bridge. Hundreds of alien warships hung in orbit, a bristling wall of metal and menace. Every spacefaring race was represented, except the Krill. "They're hailing us, demanding we join some sort of diplomatic summit on Earth," the comms officer reported. Phillips and the senior crew took a shuttle down to the summit. Dozens of alien ambassadors and Earth's representatives sat around a massive conference table. The tension was palpable. A tall, blue-scaled alien rose, fixing the humans with a condescending glare. "Your species has destabilized the established galactic order with your irrational behavior, aiding inferior races, defying the natural hierarchy. This ends now." Murmurs of agreement came from the other aliens. The human delegation leader stood defiantly. "We won't be dictated to. Humanity will continue to act in accordance with our principles, not your order. You will cease all space exploration and accept restrictions on your technological development," the alien ambassador demanded, "or face the consequences." "We refuse. It's our unalienable right to—" Alarms blared as the view screen showed the alien fleet moving to surround Earth, weapon systems charging. Just as war seemed inevitable, the screens flickered and an unfamiliar voice echoed through the chamber. "This is Theros, High Speaker of the Zarantine. We wish to address humanity and humanity alone." The human delegates shared uncertain glances, then nodded. "We'll hear what you have to say." Theros appeared on the screen, his features haggard. "A few of us escaped the Krill's genocide of our homeworld thanks to you. But now, the Krill are coming for Earth. My scouts have seen their invasion fleet massing." He leaned forward. "If they conquer you, the Krill will become unstoppable. Humanity's industry is too valuable to them. Let us help. We can provide data to evacuate your civilians and tactical support to bolster your defenses." The room erupted into argument. Phillips watched the human delegation huddle, then turned back to the screen. "We accept your help, Theros. Humanity won't abandon you again. The aliens watched in stony silence as the humans and Zarantine began frantically planning Earth's defense. Phillips coordinated the civilian evacuation while Theros advised the military leadership. During a brief respite, Theros pulled Phillips aside and pressed a small alien device into his palm. If we fall, this is the key to our survival. Before Phillips could respond, Theros strode away to the next crisis. Phillips stared at the inscrutable object. What secrets did it hold? He tucked it away and turned back to the organized chaos of a world preparing for war. As the Krill warfleet dropped out of hyperspace on the outskirts of the Sol system, the allied alien ships turned tail and fled, their drives flaring as they abandoned humanity to its grim fate. Only the handful of Zarantine ships remained, a tiny force against the Krill armada. In the concrete depths of a fortified bunker, newly promoted General Philip Phillips coordinated Earth's defenses, his face lit by the glow of a dozen tactical displays. He watched the Krill ships advance, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent energy. "Theros, what's your status?" Philip barked into the comms. "My squadron is engaging the enemy vanguard," Theros replied, his voice distorted by static. "We will buy you as much time as we can." Above the blue curve of Earth, Theros led his fighters in a desperate charge, Zarantine plasma cannons flaring as they dueled with the Krill's forward pickets. The Zarantine ships wove and dodged, their alien engines far more maneuverable than human craft, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. As the main Krill fleet entered weapons range, the orbital defense grid Theros had helped design opened fire, hurling storms of missiles and directed energy beams at the invaders. Krill ships died by the dozens, torn apart by the fusillade, their shattered hulks spinning into the void. But the Krill kept coming, heedless of losses. They rammed the defense platforms, sacrificing their own ships to create gaps in the grid's coverage that the rest of the fleet ruthlessly exploited. On the tactical displays, Philip saw troop ships descending through the atmosphere, each one packed with hundreds of gene-forged Krill warriors bred for conquest. They landed in their thousands, swarming from their ships like ants from a kicked nest. Philip made the call, "Activate the mass drivers." Across the planet, hidden silos yawned open, and city-sized slugs were loaded into continent-spanning magnetic accelerators. With a thrumming whine that shook the ground for miles, the mass drivers hurled their projectiles into the sky at a sizable fraction of light speed. The hypersonic slugs crossed thousands of kilometers in seconds, smashing into the Krill fleet like the fists of an angry god. Shields flared and failed as the projectiles shattered ships and soldiers alike, the fleet's advance faltering under the onslaught. But there were simply too many ships, even for the mass drivers. The Krill surged onwards, their surviving troop ships disgorging hordes of vicious shock troops around the mass driver complexes. Philip watched the displays in dismay as the Krill made landfall in greater numbers than any simulations had predicted. Zarantine hover tanks and human armor units fought back in desperate holding actions, the ground shaking with the thunder of their guns. But it wasn't enough. In orbit, Theros dueled the Krill pickets, his squadron reduced to a handful of ships. Alarms screamed in his cockpit as his shields failed. He jinked to the side, narrowly avoiding a barrage of missiles. He'd lost track of the number of ships he'd killed, lost in the chaotic melee of flashing weapons and shattered hulls. But it still wasn't enough. As the mass drivers fired again and again until their barrels glowed white-hot, as Zarantine and human alike died by the thousands on the blood-soaked soil of Earth, one fact became inescapable. The Krill could sustain these gargantuan losses and still overwhelm them all through sheer unrelenting numbers. In the command bunker, Philip watched the tactical displays with mounting dread. The Krill onslaught showed no signs of abating, even as Earth's defenses exacted a horrific toll. He clenched his fists, mind racing. There had to be a way to make the Krill see reason, to end this before both sides bled themselves white. An idea struck him like a thunderbolt. It was a long shot, but he had to try. Philip turned to the comms officer. "Open a channel to the Krill flagship. I need to speak to their overqueen." "But sir, that's not—" "That's an order, Lieutenant." The officer gulped and bent over his console. "Channel open, sir." The main view screen flickered, then resolved into a nightmarish image. The Krill Overqueen loomed before Philip, her carapace glistening with ichor, her compound eyes swirling with malevolent intelligence. When she spoke, her voice slithered into Philip's mind like a venomous serpent. "Why do you disturb me, human?" Philip stood tall, refusing to be cowed. "I demand to know why you're so hell-bent on our destruction. What have we done to deserve this?" The Overqueen's mandibles clacked in a chitinous laugh. "You dare ask? Humanity destroyed a krill nesting fleet a century ago. Thousands of our egg layers slaughtered. We do not forget. We do not forgive." "That was an accident," Philip shot back. "Your ships attacked without warning. Our spacers defended themselves." "Irrelevant. The krill do not distinguish between intent and outcome." The Overqueen's eyes narrowed. "The Zarantine were merely a means to an end. We knew that by attacking them, we would provoke you to intervene, giving us the pretext we needed to invade your world in retaliation. A regrettable but necessary sacrifice." Philip's blood ran cold. The Zarantine, butchered like cattle, just to lure humanity into the krill's trap. His mind raced, searching for some way to get through to the alien tyrant. "By that logic, we'd be justified in wiping out the krill for what you did to the Zarantine. An unprovoked genocide." The Overqueen's laughter grated like nails on a chalkboard. "You would sacrifice your species for a race of primitives? How noble, how foolish." Philip leaned forward, eyes flashing. "Humanity stands by its principles and its friends, even in the face of annihilation. So I'm giving you one chance." He raised a finger. "Cease hostilities now, or we will show you the true meaning of total war." The view screen went blank as the Overqueen cut the transmission without a word. Moments later, the bunker shook as the krill renewed their assault with redoubled fury. Philip turned to his ashen-faced staff, his expression grim but resolute. "It's time, people. Break out the doomsday weapons. If the krill want a war of extermination, then by God we'll give them one they'll never forget." In the command bunker, Philip's eyes narrowed as he gave the fateful order. "Activate Mjolnir." On the view screens, Earth's moon cracked and shattered, vast chunks of rock splitting away to reveal the gleaming barrel of a railgun the size of a small country. Without preamble, it opened fire, hurling mountain-sized projectiles across the void. The krill ships had no time to react. One moment they were pressing their attack, the next they were wiped from existence as the hypervelocity slugs tore through their fleet. Shields flared and failed, hulls crumpled like tin foil. In less than a second, 100 krill ships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But Mjolnir was only the beginning. On the surface, hidden silos yawned open and released swarms of glittering silver dust. The nanobots. They spread across the scarred landscape, devouring wreckage and corpses, replicating exponentially. In minutes, they had constructed armies of robotic war machines that marched on articulated legs of gleaming alloy towards the invaders. Philip watched the tactical displays grimly as the casualty reports rolled in. Krill losses were staggering, entire divisions annihilated with each shot from Mjolnir, entire landing zones overrun by the tireless nanobot constructs. But still, the krill kept coming. For every ship destroyed, for every warrior slain, 2 more took their place, an unending tide of chitin and hate. "Sir, incoming transmission from Theros." Philip spun to face the view screen as Theros' face appeared, his features strained. "Philip, I've analyzed the data from that device I gave you. It contains blueprints for a weapon that can kill the Overqueen. Take out her ship, and the swarms will fall into disarray." "What's the catch?" Philip asked, already dreading the answer. "The weapon needs a rare isotope. We can only synthesize it in the heart of a dying star." Theros paused. "I would go, but my place is here, fighting beside your people." Philip didn't hesitate. "Send me the coordinates. I'll get your isotope." He turned to his staff. Get me Fireteam Odin and prep the Star Lance for immediate dust-off. As the staff scrambled to obey, Philip opened a channel to Major Tanner. The Major's face appeared on the screen, his jaw set with grim resolve as he directed the battle from a forward command post. Tanner, I'm leaving you in command of the defense. Hold the line, no matter the cost. Tanner met Philip's gaze steadily. We'll hold, sir. This is our home. We'll die before we let them take it. Philip nodded, throat tight. He forced himself to turn away, striding towards the hangar where the Star Lance awaited. His hand-picked commandos, Fireteam Odin, were already geared up, faces grim beneath their helmets. As the hangar doors rumbled open and the Star Lance's engines howled to life, Philip looked over his shoulder one last time. Tanner stood ramrod straight, one hand raised in a final salute. Philip returned the salute, then sealed his helmet and boarded the ship. Moments later, the Star Lance leapt skyward on a pillar of blue fire, clawing for orbit and the red giant star beyond. Behind it, Earth burned, locked in a war that would decide the fate of two species. Philip only hoped that he would return in time to make a difference. The Star Lance shuddered as it decelerated from hyperspace, the swollen red orb of Betelgeuse looming before it. In the cockpit, Philip gripped the controls, his face lit by the dying star's baleful glare. Behind him, Fireforge Squad checked their weapons and sealed their armored vacuum suits. Readings are off the charts, Sergeant Hawkins reported, his voice crackling over the comm. Radiation, plasma density, gravimetric shear, this is going to be a rough ride. Philip nodded grimly. The Zarantine blueprints say we need to get in close, right into the chromosphere. He pushed the throttle forward, angling the Star Lance towards the seething stellar surface. As they descended, the ship bucked and juddered, its hull groaning under the immense forces. Sweat beaded on Philip's brow as he fought to keep them on course. Suddenly, a brilliant flare erupted from the star's surface, a coronal mass ejection of staggering proportions. The Star Lance's shields flared as a tsunami of charged particles washed over the ship. Shields at 20%, Hawkins shouted over the blaring alarms. Comms are fried, long-range scanners too. Philip clenched his jaw. They were on their own now, cut off from Earth. But they had a mission to complete. Suit up, he ordered. We're taking the shuttle from here. Leaving the battered Star Lance in a tenuous orbit, Philip and his squad boarded the heavily shielded shuttle and plunged even deeper into the star's outer layers. The small craft shook violently as it punched through the roiling plasma, its hull glowing cherry red from the intense heat. Hull temperature critical, Corporal Jansen yelled from the engineering station. Almost there, Philip called back, eyes locked on his instruments. Beginning exotic matter collection. Now! Manipulator arms extended from the shuttle's underside, scooping up the precious material. But the process was agonizingly slow, each second stretching into an eternity as the hull temperature climbed ever higher. Captain, we've got incoming. Hawkins's voice was tight with tension. Massive plasma vortex bearing 09 or 5. Philip's head snapped up, his eyes widening at the sight before them. A gargantuan plasma tornado loomed ahead, a seething, writhing maelstrom of stellar matter. It towered above them, wider than a dozen Earths, its magnetic fields crackling with the power of 1,000 storms. There was no time to escape, no time for anything but a desperate gamble. Philip wrenched the control yoke hard over, steering the shuttle directly towards the heart of the celestial cyclone. The small craft plunged into the vortex, instantly caught in its irresistible grip. It spun and tumbled, utterly at the mercy of the stellar currents. The hull screamed as it was compressed and twisted, rivets popping like gunshots. Philip fought to keep the nose up, even as the G-forces threatened to crush him into his seat. His vision narrowed, his lungs straining for air. He could hear Hawkins and Jansen yelling, but their voices seemed to come from a vast distance. Just as blackness encroached on his vision, just as he felt the shuttle beginning to come apart around him, they burst into the eye of the storm. The turbulence vanished, replaced by an eerie, preternatural calm. Philip blinked sweat from his eyes, hardly daring to believe they were still alive. What is that? Jansen breathed, awe and fear mingling in his voice. Ahead of them, hovering in the plasma like an island in a sea of fire, was a colossal structure of dark metal. It was a torus, a ring the size of a small moon, its surface etched with glowing alien glyphs. It rotated slowly, ponderously, emanating a palpable aura of ancient power. A stellar engine, Philip whispered, the realization dawning on him like a supernova. The Zarantine weren't the first ones here. Someone else built this, long ago, to control the star itself. He turned to his squad, a fierce light in his eyes. If we can restart it, make it accelerate Betelgeuse's fusion, it would go supernova, all the exotic matter we could ever need. Hawkins shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. We barely made it this far, and now you want to blow up a star? Philip met his gaze steadily. I want to save Earth, whatever it takes. He turned back to the controls, angling the shuttle towards the alien megastructure. Now let's see if we can wake this ancient behemoth up. The Star Lance shuddered as it docked with the alien megastructure, locking into place with a resounding clang. Philip and his squad checked their weapons one last time, hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. Helmets on, check seals, Philip ordered. We're about to enter the unknown. They stepped through the airlock into a world of dark metal and pulsing lights. The air was thin and acrid, tinged with the scent of ancient machinery. Tharos's voice crackled over the comm, guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. Take the next left, then right at the junction. They moved quickly, boots ringing on the metal floor. Time was not on their side. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the stellar engine, a vast, circular chamber dominated by a pulsing orb of blinding energy. It hung suspended in a web of crackling conduits that snaked across the walls and ceiling. This is it, Tharos said, awe in his voice. The control nexus. They approached the orb cautiously, scanning for any sign of a control interface. Hawkins ran his gloved hands over the nearest conduit, frowning. I don't see any panels or screens. How do we operate this thing? Before anyone could respond, a bone-chilling psychic scream tore through their minds like a rusty blade. Philip staggered, barely keeping his feet. He knew that sensation all too well. It's the Overqueen. She knows we're here. As if on cue, proximity alarms blared. Jansen, monitoring the sensors, paled. Captain, we've got a Krill warship incoming. It just emerged from the plasma storm. Battle stations, Philip barked. Tharos, keep working on the controls. We'll handle the bugs. Fireforge squad raced to the ancient defense turret set into the chamber's walls. The weapons were unfamiliar, but Hawkins and Jansen were quick studies. They powered up the turrets, swiveling them to face the approaching threat. The Krill ship disgorged a swarm of attack drones, each one a whirring, darting nightmare of spikes and blades. They swept towards the stellar engine, weapons spitting plasma. Hawkins and Jansen opened fire, lances of searing light stabbing out to impale the drones. Explosions peppered the void as the turrets found their marks. But for each drone destroyed, two more took its place. They slipped past the defensive fire, latching onto the structure's hull. The sound of rending metal echoed through the chamber as they began to cut their way inside. They're breaching the outer hull, Philip yelled over the din of battle. He unslung his rifle, taking up position near the main entrance. Tharos, tell me you've got something. I'm trying, Tharos shouted back, his hands flying over the alien controls. This technology is ancient. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The deck shuddered as the first drone broke through, skittering towards them on razor-sharp legs. Philip didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the armor-piercing rounds tearing the machine apart. But more followed, a chittering tide of metal and malice. Fireforge squad fought with desperate fury, their weapons chattering as they held the line. Drones fell by the dozen, but still they came. Tharos! Philip roared over the cacophony. We're running out of time! In that moment, as the drones closed in and all seemed lost, Tharos had a flash of inspiration. The orb, the conduits, They were an interface, but not for hands and screens, for a mind. Without hesitation, he plunged his hands into the energy web. Agony seared through his nerves as the ancient system merged with his neural pathways. He screamed but held on, pouring his entire being into the machine. And the stellar engine awoke. A deep, subsonic hum filled the chamber as long-dormant systems stirred to life. The orb pulsed faster, brighter, thrumming with unimaginable energies. Across Betelgeuse's roiling surface, titanic collector arrays swiveled and aligned, focusing the star's raw power into the central reactor. The krill drones faltered, their systems overloaded by the surge of energy. Philip and his team pressed their advantage, cutting down the disoriented machines with ruthless efficiency. In the heart of the stellar engine, the energy buildup reached critical mass. With a blinding flash, it released a colossal pulse of pure, unfettered stellar power directly into Betelgeuse's core. The results were cataclysmic. Deep within the red giant, fusion reactions spiked to 1 billion times their normal rate. The star's core began to collapse, unable to support its own mass. A runaway fusion reaction spread outward from the center, consuming everything in its path. The krill warship never stood a chance. It vanished in a flare of incandescent plasma as Betelgeuse went supernova, the shockwave racing outward at nearly 1/3 the speed of light. "Go, go, go!" Philip yelled, hurling a grenade to cover their retreat. The stellar engine shook itself apart around them, ancient beams and supports groaning and snapping like twigs. They ran, Jansen and Hawkins supporting Theros's limp form between them. The Zarentine was barely conscious, his body ravaged by the strain of communing with the ancient machine. The Starlance's airlock gaped ahead, a promise of safety. They stumbled through, sealing the hatch behind them. Philip threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. The sleek ship leapt forward, engines screaming as it raced to outpace the oncoming supernova. The expanding fireball filled the rear view screens, a roiling tsunami of star stuff. Philip coaxed every last ounce of speed from the protesting engines, the frame shuddering around them. The supernova's leading edge was a bright, hungry horizon, growing closer with each passing second. But the Starlance held together, staying just ahead of the blast. As the supernova consumed the last remnants of the stellar engine, the ship leapt into hyperspace, riding the shockwave like a surfer on a monstrous wave. In the blue swirl of hyperspace, Philip finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against the Krill Overqueen herself, and they had harvested the exotic matter they needed to forge a weapon that could end the war. But as he glanced back at Theros's unconscious form, at the battered and weary faces of his squad, Philip knew their fight was far from over. Earth still hung in the balance, and the Overqueen's wrath would be terrible to behold. The Starlance shuddered as it rode the supernova's shockwave, the immense energy propelling it back towards Earth at breakneck speeds. In the medbay, Theros lay motionless, his mind seared by the strain of melding with the ancient stellar engine. Philip gripped the armrests as the ship bucked and jolted. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life. "This is Major Tanner. The Krill have broken through. They're landing in force. Our defenses are crumbling." Philip leaned forward, dread coiling in his gut. "Tanner, report! What's happening?" It's a nano-plague. It disintegrates organic matter on contact. Cities are going dark one by one." Philip slammed his fist on the console. "Hold the line, Tanner. We're coming." He pushed the Starlance's engines harder, redlining every system. Alarms blared as the ship rattled dangerously. Earth grew larger ahead, but so did the swarms of krill ships encircling it. "That's a damn blockade," Hawkins growled. "We'll never punch through." Philip's eyes narrowed. Maybe we don't have to. He raced to the cargo hold, mind racing. The exotic matter pulsed in its containment unit, strange and seductive. If they could shape it into a black hole, wield it as a weapon. Suddenly, Theros convulsed on the medbay table, psychic energy crackling around him. Philip charged into the room. "He's resonating with the exotic matter," Jansen yelled, trying to hold Theros down. It's like he's reaching for it. Philip grabbed a stimulant injector. They needed Theros conscious, needed his psionic abilities to control the singularity. He jammed the injector into Theros' neck. The Zarentine's eyes snapped open, blazing with eldritch light. I can feel it, Philip, the power to reshape worlds. Together, they stumbled to the cargo hold. Philip hastily rigged a launch mechanism as Theros knelt, hands outstretched. The exotic matter writhed and twisted, compressing into a microscopic point of infinite density. Calculations complete, Hawkins called from the bridge. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The singularity shot from the ship, hurtling towards the Krill blockade. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space-time buckled. The black hole expanded violently, a yawning pit of darkness that warped the very fabric of reality. Krill ships splintered and cracked, sucked into the ravenous gravity well. Now, Philip roared. The Starlance's engines flared, propelling them towards the breach in the blockade. The ship rode the black hole's edge, the event horizon scraping its hull. Philip held his breath, knuckles white on the controls. With a bone-jarring lurch, they punched through, the singularity collapsing behind them. Earth hung ahead, shrouded in the haze of war. Krill ships wheeled around, giving chase. Philip armed the weapons, lips peeled back in a defiant snarl. The final battle for humanity had begun. The Starlance shuddered as it knifed through the Earth's smoke-choked atmosphere, the once blue planet now mottled with the sickly green of Krill nanoplague. Philip raised Major Tanner on the comms, his heart sinking at the rasping, pain-filled voice that responded. Major, what's your status? A wet cough. Krill. Everywhere. They've taken the mass driver control center. Philip gripped the armrest. We're on our way. Hold on, Tanner. Too late for me. Tanner's breath rattled in his chest. You've got to retake that control center, Philip. It's our only... The line went dead. Philip bowed his head for a moment, then turned to Fireforge Squad, eyes hard. Gear up. We're going in hot. The Starlance set down in the rubble-strewn wasteland that had once been New York City. As the ramp lowered, the stench of death and decay rolled into the ship. Fireforge Squad, encased in powered armor and bristling with weapons, strode out into the hellscape. The once proud skyscrapers were now shattered husks, their bones jutting into the poisoned sky. Burned-out war machines littered the cratered streets, the twisted metal already being consumed by the creeping tendrils of nanoplague. Philip led the way, his armor's HUD painting the ruins in ghostly green. Control centers beneath the old UN building. Let's move. As they picked their way through the debris, haggard figures began to emerge from the shadows, human survivors, their faces gaunt and haunted. Zarentine warriors, their crystalline armor pitted and scarred. They fell in behind Philip, weapons held at the ready. Progress was agonizingly slow, each city block a hard-fought battle. Krill drones skittered from the ruins, their massed fire glancing off the squad's armor. Philip and his team responded with precise bursts, each shot vaporizing the eldritch horrors. But as they delved deeper into the city's corpse, a new nightmare revealed itself. Looming organic structures pulsed amidst the wreckage, veined and fleshy. Philip's suit sensors detected human and Zarentine life signs within. God almighty, Hawkins breathed over the comms. They're growing them. Philip's gut turned to ice as the terrible realization hit him. The Krill weren't just exterminating, they were assimilating, building their army from Earth's defenders. He opened a channel to the whole squad. New objective. We crack open those meat sacks and pull out anyone still breathing. No one gets left behind. Acknowledgements crackled over the comms. They split into teams, moving with practiced precision. At each growth, Jansen would rig shaped charges, while the Zarentine used their ESI skills to locate any mines not yet subsumed. The walls parted with wet, tearing sounds, revealing scenes from the darkest nightmares. Humans and Zarentine, their bodies melded with pulsing Krill biotech, stared out with pleading eyes. Some wept in relief as Philip's team cut them free. Others simply crumbled to dust, too far gone. In one growth, larger than the rest, they found a familiar face, Captain Hernandez, his once proud form now a monstrous hybrid of flesh and metal. He looked up as Philip tore the webbing away and smiled through cracked lips. "Knew you'd come back for me, soldier." Philip clasped his warped hand. "Always, sir. We leave no one behind." Hernandez nodded to the pulsing walls. "I've been organizing the resistance in here. Sabotage, intel gathering, keeping the Krill off balance. I can guide you into the control center, past their heaviest defenses." Philip helped him to his feet. "Lead the way, Captain. We've got a planet to save." Together, the ragtag army plunged into the organic labyrinth, Hernandez guiding them through twisting, pulsing tunnels untouched by human feet. They moved in eerie silence, the only sound the squelch of meat beneath their boots and the distant thrum of the Krill's dark machinery. Philip couldn't help but marvel at the sheer alienness of it all, even as revulsion coiled in his gut. But there was no time to ponder the nightmarish biology of the Krill. Every second brought them closer to their goal, and humanity's last hope. Hernandez held up a fist, halting the column. "We're here," he whispered, his voice echoing strangely from his misshapen jaw. The heart of the swarm. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber pulsing with malevolent light. In the center, a towering spire of flesh and metal rose from a seething pool of nanoplague, its peak lost in the shadowed heights above. The mass driver control center, the key to Earth's survival, and it was firmly in the grasp of the Krill. Philip checked his weapon, the weight familiar and reassuring in his hands. He met the eyes of each member of Fireforge's squad, seeing his own determination reflected back. "All right, people, you know the drill. We go in hard and fast, secure that control room. Captain Hernandez, any chance of getting your resistance fighters to cause a distraction?" Hernandez grinned, a ghastly sight with his transformed features. "Oh, we'll give them a distraction, all right. The Krill will learn to fear the sting of their own thralls." Philip nodded grimly. "Then let's teach these bugs the real meaning of resistance. Fireforge, engage." With a roar of defiance, the human Zarantine force charged from the tunnel, weapons blazing. The towering chamber erupted into chaos as shrieking Krill warriors swarmed to meet them. Philip lost himself in the familiar rhythm of battle, his rifle bucking against his shoulder as he put down target after chittering target. All around him, the resistance fighters struck from the shadows, their Krill-derived weapons tearing into their former masters. Hernandez was a whirlwind of steel and fury, his augmented body granting him inhuman strength and speed. Foot by blood-soaked foot, they pushed towards the control center, an island of cold metal amidst the organic nightmare. Krill warriors fell before them, their ichor slicking the pulsing floor. But for everyone that fell, a dozen more charged heedless into the meat grinder. Philip reloaded on the fly, jamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. They were close now, the control room just ahead, but a final horror barred their way, a towering monstrosity of flesh and sinew, its gaping maw lined with razor-sharp fangs. A Praetorian, the Krill's elite shock troops, twisted and augmented far beyond the rank and file, it waded into the battle with a roar that shook the chamber, scything down resistance fighters with every swing of its massive claws. Philip emptied his rifle into the beast, the shot sparking off its armored hide. It turned towards him, its eyeless face splitting open to reveal row upon row of jagged teeth. Philip braced himself for the onslaught, but before the Praetorian could charge, a searing lance of light punched through its skull. It toppled like a felled tree, its monstrous body crushing a score of lesser Krill beneath its bulk. Philip turned to see Theros, the Zarantine's hands still crackling with psionic energy. The alien gave him a weary nod, then turned back to the fight, hurling bolts of searing light into the Krill ranks. With the Praetorian down, the way to the control room was clear. Philip rallied his squad, the battered survivors forming up around him. Together, they mounted the final steps, even as the Krill redoubled their assault, determined to stop them. But Philip would not be denied, not when they were so close. He roared his defiance as he crossed the threshold, Fireforge squad at his back. The Krill shrieked in inhuman rage as the humans claimed their prize, slamming the blast doors shut on the seething horde. For a moment, all was still, the sudden silence almost deafening. Philip leaned against the cold metal walls, his armor scored and pitted, his body aching from 100 wounds. But as he looked around at his squad, at the haggard but unbroken faces of the men and women who had followed him into hell, he felt a surge of fierce pride. They had done it. Against all odds, they had reached the mass driver control center. Now, the real fight could begin. The fight to take back their world, to drive the Krill screaming back into the void that spawned them. Philip straightened, ignoring the pain of his battered body. Jansen, get those guns back online. Hawkins, fortify our position. The Krill will be coming and in force. We need to be ready. As his squad leapt to obey, Philip turned to the view screens, watching the seething sea of chitin and hatred that surged against the walls of their fortress. You want Earth, you nightmare bastards? He growled, his finger hovering over the trigger that would rain cleansing fire on the monstrosities below. Then come and take it. Fireforge squad advanced through the pulsing organic tunnels that burrowed beneath the ravaged city. The walls contracted around them with each step, a nightmarish imitation of peristalsis. Slick, membranous surfaces glistened in the sickly light of bioluminescent growths. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the acrid stench of krill pheromones. Hernandez led the way, his transformed body navigating the twisting passages with uncanny ease. Philip followed close behind, his plasma rifle at the ready. Theros and the rest of the squad brought up the rear, their faces grim beneath their helmets. After what felt like an eternity of wading through the pulsating nightmare, they emerged into a cavernous space that had once been the control center's main atrium. Now it was a grotesque parody of its former self. The walls throbbed with pustulant growths, and the floor was carpeted with a writhing mass of fleshy tendrils. The hum of alien machinery filled the air, a discordant counterpoint to the wet, organic sounds of the krill's corruption. Hernandez gestured towards a dark opening on the far side of the atrium. The central control room is through there, but be on your guard. The krill will not give it up easily. As if on cue, a swarm of krill drones burst from the shadows, their chitinous bodies bristling with grafted weapons. They were a nightmarish fusion of human, Zarantine, and krill, their faces twisted into rictuses of agony and rage. Philip opened fire, his plasma rifle searing through the onrushing horde. Theros unleashed a blast of psionic energy, sending drones flying like ragdolls. The rest of Fireforge squad joined the fray, their weapons chattering in the confined space. But for every drone they felled, 2 more surged forward to take its place. The squad found themselves being pushed back, forced into a tight defensive circle. Claws raked against armor, and acid-slick tentacles probed for gaps in their defenses. Philip found himself back-to-back with Theros, the 2 warriors fighting in perfect sync. Philip's rifle blazed, each shot vaporizing a drone's head. Theros' psionic blasts ripped through the krill ranks, turning drones inside out with the force of his will. But it wasn't enough. The krill pressed in from all sides, a chittering tide of teeth and claws. Fireforge squad fought with the desperate ferocity of the damned, but they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Just as all seemed lost, Hernandez let out a guttural roar. He thrust his transformed arm outward, and a pulse of psionic energy erupted from his twisted flesh. The pulse washed over the krill swarm, and the drones convulsed as one, their bodies going rigid. In the sudden, shocked silence, Hernandez turned to Philip, his face a mask of pain and determination. "A psionic disruptor," he rasped. "I've been working on it in secret, trying to break the krill's hold over those they've assimilated, but it's only temporary. We need to reach the control room and shut down their command signal before they recover." Philip nodded grimly. "Then let's move. Fireforge, on me." They charged through the atrium, leaping over the twitching bodies of the incapacitated drones. The central control room loomed ahead, a pulsating mass of flesh and metal. They plunged into its fetid depths, weapons at the ready. What they found inside defied description. A seething organic mass dominated the room, growing from the central computer core like a cancerous tumor. Entangled in its writhing tendrils were the barely recognizable remains of the control room staff, their bodies and minds subsumed into the Krill's collective consciousness. Philip spotted the neural interface at the heart of the mass, the key to the mass driver's control system. Steeling himself, he revved his plasma blade and began to hack his way through the fleshy growths, each stroke searing through the pulsating mass. But as he neared the interface, the organic growth suddenly surged to life. Barbed tendrils lashed out, seeking to ensnare him. Philip hacked at them desperately, his blade a blur of searing light. A scream of agony cut through the air. Philip spun to see Hernandez impaled on a thick, fleshy tentacle, his body lifted into the air like a grotesque puppet. The transformed captain writhed in the thing's grasp, his face contorted in pain. Philip started towards him, but Hernandez shook his head. "No," he gasped. "The interface. You must shut it down." With a last titanic effort, Hernandez brought his transformed arm to bear on the tentacle holding him. He unleashed a final psionic blast, and the tentacle burst apart in a spray of ichor. Hernandez fell to the floor, his chest a ruined mass of flesh and bone. Philip let out a scream of rage and anguish. He turned back to the interface, hacking at the grasping tendrils with renewed fury. With a final, desperate lunge, he plunged his fist into the heart of the mass, his fingers closing around the neural uplink. The organic growth convulsed around him, its tendrils coiling around his arm, trying to pull him in. Philip gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of his will into the connection. He could feel the Krill's hive mind pressing against his own, a vast and alien presence trying to subsume his very being. But Philip held on, his mind a blazing beacon of defiance. He focused all his thoughts on the mass drivers, visualizing their immense barrels rising from their silos, their magnetic coils thrumming with power. In a blinding flash of neural feedback, Philip's consciousness surged into the control system. For a timeless moment, he was the mass drivers, his thoughts racing along their targeting arrays, his will guiding their immense projectiles. He could see the Krill fleet in orbit, their ships bloated with stolen life. He could feel the mass drivers' hunger, their desire to smite the invaders from the sky. All he had to do was give the command, and the Krill would be obliterated in a storm of hypervelocity vengeance. But even as his finger tightened on the mental trigger, Philip hesitated. To fire the mass drivers now, with Earth's cities overrun and its people enslaved, would be to condemn millions to death beneath the guns meant to save them. He thought of Hernandez's sacrifice, of Tharos's unwavering bravery, of all the lives that had been lost in this desperate battle. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. With a thought, Philip redirected the mass drivers' targeting arrays. Instead of aiming at the Krill fleet, he pointed them inward, towards the heart of the occupied city, towards the towering organic spires that had once been skyscrapers, towards the seething hives where the Krill cocooned their living victims. He would not let the Krill have his world. He would not let them twist and defile the very soul of humanity. If Earth was to die, it would die free, unbowed, and unbroken. Philip took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the trigger in his mind. He thought of his squad, of the brave men and women who had followed him into this nightmare. He thought of all the lives he was about to end, human and Zarantine alike. "Forgive me," he whispered. And then he fired. For a timeless moment, Philip was lost in a whirlwind of fractured memories and nightmarish sensations as his consciousness merged with the mass driver control system. The digital landscape warped and twisted, a hellish fusion of Earth's ruined cities and the Krill's eldritch conquests. Shadows rose from the flickering depths, wearing Philip's own face. They circled him, their voices dripping with malice as they hurled his deepest doubts and regrets back at him. "You failed them," one hissed, its form shifting into the broken bodies of Philip's fallen comrades. "Just like you failed the Zarentine." "Weak," another spat, its eyes burning with the Overqueen's hatred. "Unworthy." Philip staggered under the onslaught, his will faltering. But then he saw them, the shattered remnants of the control center staff, their consciousnesses fighting a losing battle against the Krill's overwhelming presence. He pushed through the phantoms, his resolve hardening into a blade of pure determination. He reached out to the beleaguered human minds, his voice ringing through the chaos. "Rally to me," he called. "Together we can beat this thing." One by one, they came to him, their fragmented selves coalescing around his unwavering will. They formed a shining phalanx of mental fortitude, a united front against the alien invaders. With Philip at their head, they surged forward, driving the Krill's influence back step by hard-fought step. The mindscape shuddered and warped as they clashed, the very fabric of the digital realm bending to their struggle. In the physical world, Tharos gritted his teeth, his psionic barriers shimmering under the relentless assault of the Krill's organic mass. Fireforge Squad poured plasma fire into the writhing tendrils, buying Philip precious seconds in his mental duel. But the mass was relentless, driven by the hive mind's desperate fury. It lashed out with renewed ferocity, as if sensing the tide turning against it in the digital realm. Tharos fell to one knee, blood trickling from his nose as he pushed his powers to their limits. The barrier wavered, the grasping tendrils inching closer to Philip's defenseless form. Inside the mindscape, Philip and his united human consciousness drove the Krill back to their central nexus, a pulsating knot of malevolent psionic energy. The hive mind's presence coalesced before them, a towering figure of shifting chitin and nightmare flesh. It radiated arrogance and disdain, assured of its own superiority. Philip stepped forward, his mental avatar blazing with the combined hopes and dreams of humanity in the Zarentine. He met the hive mind's gaze unflinchingly. "I challenge you," he declared, his voice ringing with power. "Your will against mine, for control of the mass drivers." The hive mind's laughter echoed through the mindscape, cruel and mocking. "You dare to contest us? You, a mere mote against the vastness of our being?" "I dare," Philip replied, unwavering. "Do you accept, or will you slink away like the coward you are?" Rage pulsed from the Krill nexus. "We accept, human, and when we crush your feeble mind, your species will be next." The mindscape shattered, reforming into a maelstrom of swirling memories and emotions. Philip and the hive mind clashed at its heart, their wills grappling for dominance. It was a battle unlike any Philip had ever known, fought on a landscape where thought and reality were one. The Krill's vast alien intellect bore down on him, a crushing weight of hunger and hate. For a terrible moment, it seemed he would be swept away, his mind shattered by the sheer immensity of the Krill's presence. But then he felt them, the Zarentine, the remnants of humanity, every soul that had ever stood against the darkness. Their hopes, their dreams, their unbreakable spirit flowed into him, a shining river of light against the hive mind's shadow. Philip seized that light, forging it into a blade of pure, unbending will. With a cry that shook the foundations of the mindscape, he drove that blade into the heart of the Krill nexus. The hive mind screamed, a sound of unfathomable agony and fury as Philip's will pierced its core. The maelstrom shattered, the Krill's presence dissipating like mist before a rising sun. In the physical world, the organic mass shuddered and convulsed, its tendrils withering as the hive mind's control was severed. Philip slumped over the interface, his mind and body drained by the titanic struggle. But as he looked up at the view screens, he saw the mass drivers swiveling under human control once more, their immense barrels aiming towards the sky and the Krill fleet beyond. Philip punched the firing controls with a savage grin. The mass drivers thundered, the sound reverberating through the battle-scarred control room. On the screens, he watched the first volley of projectiles streak towards the Krill fleet. The alien ships hung in orbit, their chitin hulls glistening in the Earthlight. They had no inkling of the storm about to break over their heads. The projectiles crossed the distance in heartbeats, slamming into the Krill ships with the force of angry gods. Chitons shattered, ichor sprayed into the void. A dozen ships crumpled like tin cans, spilling their innards into space. Philip whooped, his exultation shared by the ragged survivors around him. He jabbed at the controls again, sending another volley skyward. The Krill fleet scattered, their formation disintegrating under the onslaught. But they regrouped quickly, a testament to their hive mind's iron control. They surged back towards Earth, weapons blazing. Philip gritted his teeth. The real fight was just beginning. He coordinated the mass driver's fire with cold precision, leading his shots, anticipating the Krill's evasive patterns. Every shot found its mark, every impact a small victory. The remnants of Earth's orbital defenses joined the fray, missiles and energy beams stitching the void. The few remaining human ships, battered but unbowed, charged into the teeth of the enemy, guns hammering. It was a slugging match on a cosmic scale, the fate of a world hanging in the balance. The Krill had numbers, but humanity had desperation, and the mass drivers. Slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. Krill ships died by the score, shattered hulks spinning into the atmosphere to burn like meteors. But for every ship destroyed, it seemed two more took its place. The hive mind's resources were near infinite. Philip's eyes widened as a monstrous shape emerged from the Krill ranks. A dreadnought, a fusion of flesh and metal, dwarfing the largest human ship. It surged towards Earth, its maw glowing with baleful energies. The mass drivers fired again and again, their shots pocking the behemoth's hide, but it shrugged off the impacts, its armor regenerating almost as fast as it was destroyed. It was a juggernaut, unstoppable. Philip slammed his fist on the console, mind racing. The mass drivers alone couldn't stop this monstrosity. They needed something more, something the Krill would never see coming. His eyes fell on the Zarantine ships, darting amongst the Krill like silver fish in a sea of chitin. An idea sparked in his mind, desperate and audacious. He hailed the Zarantine flagship, his words tumbling out in a rush. A boarding action, a strike at the dreadnought's heart. Use the Zarantine's psionic abilities to cloak a human team. Get them inside the beast. There was silence on the line, then a crackle of assent. The Zarantine were with him, ready to risk everything in this final gambit. Philip turned to the survivors, his eyes seeking the best, the bravest. Men and women he'd fought alongside, bled alongside. They met his gaze unflinchingly, ready for what was to come. He armed himself, checking his weapons with practiced movements. Around him, his chosen warriors did the same, a silent ritual before the plunge into hell. The Zarantine ship was waiting, a sleek dagger poised to strike. Philip and his team boarded, the hatch sealing behind them with a hiss of finality. The ship slipped from the launch bay, engines flaring. It angled towards the dreadnought, the psionic cloak shimmering around it like a heat haze. Philip gripped his rifle, his heartbeat loud in his ears. This was it, the final roll of the dice. Succeed here, and they might just save Earth. Fail, and all was lost. The dreadnought loomed before them, a mountain of flesh and metal. The Zarantine pilot, face set in concentration, eased them towards a puckered opening in the behemoth's side. With a jolt, they were inside, the ship's hull scraping against pulsing, cancerous growths. The hatch hissed open, revealing a nightmarish labyrinth of organic corridors. Philip stepped out, his boots squelching on the fleshy floor. The air was thick, cloying, heavy with the stench of corruption. He checked his rifle, met the eyes of his team. No words were needed. They knew what they had to do. With a nod, Philip advanced into the gloom, his warriors fanning out behind him. Somewhere ahead, in the dreadnought's putrid heart, lay their target, the ship's control nexus, its Achilles heel. They would find it, and they would destroy it, or die in the attempt. For Earth, for humanity, for every soul the Krill had consumed. The hunt was on. Philip advanced cautiously down the pulsing corridor, his rifle sweeping the shadows. The walls throbbed wetly, as if the ship itself was alive. Cancerous growths pulsed and writhed, oozing foul ichor. Behind him, his team moved with practiced precision, covering each other, watching the angles. They were the best of the best, hand-picked for this mission. But even they were unnerved by the sheer alienness of their surroundings. A skittering sound echoed from ahead, growing louder. Philip raised a fist, halting the team. He peered into the gloom, his enhanced eyesight picking out movement. A horde of Krill warriors burst from the shadows, their chitin armor glistening in the sickly light. They were a nightmarish fusion of flesh and metal, their limbs augmented with whirring, razor-edged implants. Philip opened fire, his rifle spitting plasma. The warriors' front rank disintegrated, blown to steaming chunks, but more surged forward, heedless of their losses. The corridor erupted into a maelstrom of flashing muzzles and screeching chitin. Philip's team laid down a withering barrage, plasma and projectiles ripping into the Krill ranks. But the warriors kept coming, clambering over the twitching corpses of their fallen. Their return fire filled the air with sizzling energy bolts, scorching the fleshy walls. Philip ducked as a bolt seared past his head, the heat blistering his cheek. He snap-fired, blowing a warrior's head into a spray of ichor. Beside him, Sergeant Hawkins wielded a plasma gun with grim efficiency, each shot vaporizing a Krill torso. Corporal Jansen was a blur of motion, her monofilament blade slicing through chitin like paper. But for every warrior they felled, two more surged forward. They were being pushed back, the weight of numbers telling. A scream rang out as a warrior's razor limb punched through Private Sorensen's armor, spearing him through the gut. He crumpled, his rifle clattering to the deck. Philip gritted his teeth, rage and grief surging through him. He redoubled his fire, his rifle growing hot in his hands. Slowly, inch by blood-soaked inch, they began to push the Krill back. The warriors' advance faltered, their numbers dwindling under the relentless onslaught. With a final, desperate surge, Philip and his team broke through, leaving a carpet of twitching corpses in their wake. They paused, chests heaving, weapons smoking. Philip knelt beside Sorensen, but it was too late. The young soldier's eyes stared sightlessly at the pulsing ceiling, his lifeblood pooling around him. Philip closed his eyes for a moment, then stood, his face set in a mask of grim determination. They had to press on, for Sorensen and for every other soul lost to the Krill's insatiable hunger. He reloaded his rifle, the action as familiar as breathing. Around him, his battered team did the same, their faces streaked with sweat, soot, and alien ichor. Philip checked his HUD, orienting himself. The ship's control nexus was close, just a few more corridors away. He met his team's eyes, seeing his own resolve reflected back at him. They were ready to face whatever fresh horrors the dreadnought could throw at them. With a nod, Philip set off once more, his boots squelching on the fleshy deck. The end was in sight, one way or another. They would see this through, for Earth, for humanity. No matter the cost. As Philip and his team ventured deeper into the dreadnought's twisted bowels, a creeping dread settled over them. The pulsing corridors seemed to close in, the air thick with the stench of putrefaction. Suddenly Hawkins held up a fist, halting the squad. "Movement ahead," he hissed, his rifle snapping up. From the shadows, a figure emerged, but it was no Krill warrior. It was a grotesque fusion of human and alien, its flesh a mottled patchwork of scar tissue and chitinous plating. One arm ended in a cruel fusion of hand and blade, the other a mass of writhing tentacles. Its face was a ruin, but beneath the mutilations, Philip recognized the features of a human soldier. "My God," Jansen breathed, her face pale. "What have they done?" More shapes emerged from the gloom, a shambling horde of hybrid abominations. Each was unique in its horror, a twisted melding of human, Zarantine, and Krill. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their faces masks of agony and rage. Philip felt bile rise in his throat as the terrible realization dawned. The Krill hadn't just been killing their prisoners, they'd been experimenting on them, fusing them with their own foul biotechnology. "Open fire!" he roared, his rifle already bucking in his hands. The air filled with the thunder of gunfire and the sizzle of plasma bolts as Fireforge Squad engaged the horrors. But these were no mindless beasts. They fought with a terrible cunning, a perverse blend of human tactical knowledge and Krill savagery. Philip found himself face to face with a particularly large hybrid, its bulk a mass of rippling muscle beneath plates of grafted armor. Its face was a nightmare, but Philip felt a shock of recognition beneath the horror. Those eyes, filled with pain and pleading beneath the rage, he knew them. "Hernandez," he whispered, his rifle wavering. The thing that had been his friend let out a howl of anguish and lunged, its blade arms slicing down. Philip parried desperately, the force of the blow numbing his arm. They traded blows in a whirlwind of steel and plasma, the creature's strength inhuman. Around them, Fireforge Squad fought for their lives, the hybrids pressing in from all sides. Hawkins fell, his chest a smoking ruin from a point-blank plasma blast. Jansen fought back-to-back with Theros, her blades a blur, the Zarantine's psionic blasts searing flesh from bone. Philip barely registered their struggles, locked in his own desperate battle. Hernandez, no, the thing that had been Hernandez, hammered at his defenses, its blows coming faster than thought. Philip gave ground, step by step, his breath coming in ragged gasps. In a flash of terrible clarity, he understood the true depth of the Krill's evil. This was their end game, not just conquest, but assimilation. They would remake all life in their own twisted image, until nothing remained but their foul hybrid thralls. The knowledge filled Philip with a cold, implacable rage. He would not let that happen. He would fight to his last breath to stop this abomination, this perversion of all he held dear. With a roar of defiance, he launched himself at the hybrid, plasma blade blazing. He drove it back with a flurry of blows, ignoring the wounds that slipped through his guard, the pain that flared with every movement. The creature stumbled, off balance, and Philip seized his chance. His blade flashed down, shearing through the monster's neck. Its head tumbled to the deck, its body crumpling like a puppet with its strings cut. Philip stood over the corpse, chest heaving, his armor slick with blood, both human and alien. Around him, the last of the hybrids fell, put down by Fireforge's grim determination. But there was no time to rest, no time to mourn their fallen. The dreadnought's heart still beat, and with it, the Krill's foul ambitions. "On me," Philip growled, his voice raw. "We end this, now." He led his battered team onward, deeper into the nightmare, their footsteps ringing on the fleshy deck. They had seen the face of true evil, and they would not rest until it was scoured from the galaxy. Exhausted but victorious, Philip and his battered team emerged from the smoldering ruins of the Krill dreadnought to a hero's welcome. Throngs of human and Zarantine survivors cheered and wept as the strike team stumbled into the light, their armor scorched and dented, their faces haggard but proud. Philip accepted the accolades with a weary nod, his mind already racing ahead to the challenges to come. The Krill's defeat had shattered the fragile balance of power in the galaxy, and the other alien races were already moving to fill the vacuum. In the chaos of the celebration, Theros pulled Philip aside, his face grave. "My people are vulnerable," he said, his voice tight with worry. "We've lost so much. Without the humans' aid, we'll be easy prey for the other races." Philip gripped his friend's shoulder. "We won't abandon you, not after everything we've been through together." An idea was already taking shape in his mind, a bold plan to secure the Zarantine's future. He gathered his team and the Zarantine leaders, laying out his proposal. "We need to help the Zarantine rebuild," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not just their cities, but their strength, their independence. Only then can there be true peace." There were nods of agreement, but also looks of concern. It was a daunting task, and there were so many other pressing needs in the wake of the war. Philip pressed on. "There's more. Our intel suggests that the Krill may have uncovered ancient Zarantine technology during their invasion, technology that could change everything." The Zarantine leaders exchanged looks of surprise and alarm. Theros leaned forward, his eyes intense. "If this is true, we must secure this technology. It's our heritage, our birthright. Philip nodded. And if it falls into the wrong hands, it could mean disaster for us all. That's why I'm proposing a mission to the Zarantine homeworld. To help with the rebuilding, yes, but also to locate and secure this lost technology before anyone else can claim it. There was a moment of heavy silence as the weight of the proposal sank in. Then, one by one, the team members and Zarantine leaders nodded their assent. They knew the stakes, and they knew there was no one better to lead this mission than Philip. In a flurry of activity, the mission took shape. Supplies were gathered, ships were prepped, and a team of Philip's most trusted comrades was assembled, including Theros and a hand-picked group of Zarantine experts. As the sleek human ship lifted off, carrying the team towards the distant Zarantine homeworld, Philip felt a mix of anticipation and unease. They were embarking on a journey into the unknown, with the fate of galaxies resting on their shoulders. The Zarantine homeworld was a haunting sight, its once proud cities reduced to rubble, its landscape scarred by the Krill's merciless assault. As the team sat down in the ruins of the capital, they were met by a delegation of Zarantine survivors, their faces etched with grief and determination. Philip and his team wasted no time in getting to work. As the Zarantine engineers and builders began the painstaking process of reconstruction, Philip, Theros, and a select group of operatives set out to scour the ruins for any sign of the lost technology. It was a daunting task. The Krill's invasion had been thorough, and much of the planet's surface was a labyrinth of collapsed structures and buried secrets. But Philip's team was tenacious, driven by a sense of purpose that bordered on the obsessive. As they delved deeper into the ruins, they began to uncover tantalizing clues. Fragments of ancient texts, half-buried artifacts that hummed with strange energies. Theros pored over the findings, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These are pieces of a larger puzzle," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "I believe our ancestors were working on something incredible, something that could have changed the course of the galaxy." But they were not the only ones on the trail of the lost technology. As they explored deeper into the ruins, they began to encounter signs of other searchers, scorch marks from energy weapons, the telltale tracks of alien vehicles. It soon became clear that operatives from the other races were also on the hunt, each hoping to claim the Zarantine's secrets for their own. Philip and his team found themselves engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse, racing to stay one step ahead of their rivals. There were close calls and narrow escapes, moments when it seemed their mission might be cut short by a well-placed ambush or a cleverly laid trap. But Philip's team was resourceful and determined, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to assemble a picture of the Zarantine's ancient project. It was a weapon, they realized, but not just any weapon. The scattered clues hinted at a device of unparalleled power, something that could reshape the very fabric of space and time. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that this technology was no mere relic of the Zarantine's past. It was intimately connected to the origins of the Krill themselves. In ancient, dust-choked vaults and crumbling temples, they found records that spoke of a long-ago war, a conflict between the Zarantine and an unknown adversary. The Zarantine, it seemed, had been on the brink of defeat, and in their desperation, they had turned to a radical solution: the creation of a new form of life, a warrior race that could turn the tide of the war. But something had gone wrong. The creatures they created, the proto-Krill, had proved uncontrollable, their aggression and hunger unchecked by any moral constraints. The Zarantine had been forced to seal them away, to bury the evidence of their greatest mistake. As the true scope of the Zarantine's ancient sins came into focus, Philip felt a growing sense of unease. The technology they were chasing, the weapon that promised ultimate power, was it a key to salvation or a relic of damnation? The question weighed heavy on his mind as they raced to recover the final pieces of the puzzle, always just one step ahead of their increasingly desperate rivals. But the stakes were raised to new heights when they intercepted a communication from one of the other teams, a triumphant message claiming that they had uncovered the location of the central control device for the ancient weapon. Philip's blood ran cold as he listened to the transmission. If their rivals were able to secure the device, they would have the power to control the Krill, to turn them into an unstoppable army of conquest. It would be the end of any hope for peace in the galaxy. He gathered his team, his face set with grim determination. They had to act fast, to beat their rivals to the control device and secure it for the Zarantine. It was no longer just a race against time, it was a battle for the fate of the galaxy itself. With the stolen Krill control device secured, Philip and his team made their way back to the Zarantine homeworld, their minds racing with the implications of their discovery. As they analyzed the device, the true scope of its potential began to unfold. "This is just one part of a larger system," Theros said, his voice tight with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "If the other components are out there, and if they were to fall into the wrong hands..." Philip nodded grimly. "We can't let that happen. We need to find the rest of this system before anyone else does." They threw themselves into the search, scouring ancient Zarantine records and chasing down leads across the galaxy. Their quest took them to the ruins of long-dead civilizations, where they raced against rival operatives to uncover crumbling data caches and decipher cryptic clues. In the seedy underbelly of a sprawling space station, they tracked down a notorious information broker who promised them the location of another component. But the meeting turned out to be a trap, and they found themselves in a brutal firefight with heavily armed mercenaries. As plasma bolts sizzled past his head, Philip dove for cover, his rifle barking in his hands. Beside him, Theros let loose with a burst of psionic energy, sending their attackers flying. "We need to get out of here!" Philip yelled over the din of battle. "Fall back to the ship!" They fought their way through the twisting corridors of the station, the stolen data chip clutched tightly in Philip's hand. They barely made it back to their ship, the airlock slamming shut just as another volley of plasma slammed into the hull. As they caught their breath, Philip turned the data chip over in his hands. The information it contained was disturbing. The component they were after was located on a world quarantined by the galactic authorities, a planet where an ancient Zarantine experiment had gone horribly wrong. Philip and his team looked at each other, the weight of their mission hanging heavy in the air. They knew that what they were doing could be considered illegal, even treasonous by some. But they also knew that the stakes were too high to turn back now. As they set course for the quarantined world, each of them grappled with their own doubts and fears. The power they were chasing, the ability to manipulate life itself. It was a heavy burden to bear. Philip thought of all the lives that had been lost to the Krill, all the worlds that had been ravaged. If this system could give them a way to prevent such horrors in the future, didn't they have an obligation to pursue it? But he also knew that such power could be a terrible temptation. In the wrong hands, it could lead to a tyranny far worse than anything the Krill had ever imposed. As their ship hurtled through the void, Philip steeled himself for the challenges ahead. He knew that every decision from here on out would carry the weight of billions of lives. The quarantined planet loomed ahead, a sickly green orb shrouded in swirling clouds. As they descended through the atmosphere, they saw the ruins of Zarantine cities stretching out below, now overgrown with twisted, mutated vegetation. Their scanners picked up the telltale signature of the component they were after, located deep underground in what appeared to be an ancient research facility. But they also detected signs of activity. They weren't the only ones here. As they made their approach, a burst of energy suddenly slammed into their shields, sending the ship careening. Philip wrestled with the controls, barely managing to bring them down in a controlled crash. They emerged from the smoking wreckage, weapons at the ready. In the distance, they could see a sleek ship of unfamiliar design. Their rivals had beaten them to the punch. Philip gritted his teeth. "Double time it, people. We can't let them get their hands on that component." They raced through the ruins, following the signal from the component. But every step of the way, they were harried by their mysterious opponents. Sniper fire cracked overhead, and cloaked figures darted through the shadows, always staying just out of reach. As they descended into the depths of the ancient facility, the resistance intensified. Automated defense systems sparked to life, filling the corridors with deadly energy beams. Genetically engineered monstrosities, the remnants of the Zarantine's failed experiments, stalked them through the darkened halls. But Philip and his team pressed on, driven by a determination that bordered on desperation. They fought their way into the heart of the facility, where they found themselves face to face with their rival at last. She was Zinkari, a member of a species renowned for their mastery of genetic manipulation. She stood before the vault that held the component, a cruel smile playing across her alien features. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble," she said, her voice dripping with menace. "But it ends here. The power within this vault is mine." Philip raised his rifle, his eyes hard. "I can't let you do that. This technology in the wrong hands, it could mean the end of everything." Zinkari laughed, a chilling sound. "You fool. With this power, I can reshape the galaxy as I see fit. I can create a new order, a perfect order, with the Zinkari as its rightful masters." She held up her hand, revealing a device strapped to her palm, a control unit, pulsing with an eerie green light. "I already possess the other components," she said triumphantly. "With this final piece, the system will be complete, and you will be the first to witness its power." She pressed a button on the control unit. The vault door slid open, revealing a swirling vortex of energy. Philip felt a strange, tugging sensation, as if the vortex was reaching out to him, calling him. With a roar of defiance, he charged forward, firing as he went. His team followed suit, unleashing a hail of plasma and psionic energy. Zinkari's guards fell before the onslaught, but the Zinkari herself seemed untouchable. She danced through the chaos, her movements inhumanly graceful, her eyes glinting with malice. Philip and Zinkari clashed in the center of the chamber, trading blows with savage fury. Around them, the vortex pulsed and grew, its energy arcing out in searing bolts. Philip could feel the power of the device, could sense its potential for both creation and destruction. In that moment, he understood the terrible choice that lay before him. With a final desperate lunge, he knocked the control unit from Zinkari's hand. It clattered to the floor, its light flickering. Zinkari's eyes widened in shock and rage. She lunged for the device, but Philip was faster. He scooped it up, his finger hovering over the deactivation switch. "It's over," he panted, his body aching from the exertion of the fight. "This power, it's too dangerous for anyone to possess." Zinkari snarled, her face contorted with fury. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "With this system, we could have reshaped the very foundations of life. We could have created a new era for the galaxy." Philip shook his head. "The cost is too high. This technology, it's not meant for us. Not yet." With that, he pressed the deactivation switch. The vortex collapsed in on itself, the energy dissipating harmlessly. The other components, scattered across the chamber, went dark and lifeless. Zinkari let out a howl of rage and lunged at Philip, but Theros intercepted her, his psionic blast sending her sprawling. She lay there, stunned and defeated, as Philip and his team secured the now inert components. As they made their way back to the surface, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Zarantines' legacy, the secrets they had left behind. He knew that they would continue to shape the galaxy for years to come. But for now at least, the galaxy was safe. The power to reshape life itself would remain out of reach, hidden away until humanity and the other races were ready for the responsibility it entailed. As they boarded their ship and prepared for the journey home, Philip allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had won the day, and in doing so, they had perhaps saved the future of the entire galaxy. But even as they celebrated their victory, a new revelation came to light. The system they had secured, the devices they had fought so hard to keep out of the wrong hands. They were more than just tools of control or manipulation. They were a key to a secret that the ancient Zarantine had given their very lives to protect. A secret that, if uncovered, could change the very nature of life in the galaxy forever. As Philip stared out into the vast expanse of space, he knew that their journey was far from over. The true significance of the Zarantines' legacy was only just beginning to unfold, and he and his team would be at the forefront of the discoveries to come. The future, uncertain and thrilling, beckoned to them. And Philip, always the soldier, always the explorer, felt a thrill of anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, ready for anything. Philip and his team stood in the ancient chamber, the weight of the truth pressing down on them like a physical force. The Zarentine's hidden history, the terrible secret of the Krill's origins, the burden of the failsafe now in their hands. It was almost too much to comprehend. Theros stepped forward, his eyes haunted. I always knew there were gaps in our history, things left unsaid. But this... He gestured at the ancient glyphs covering the walls, the diagrams of twisted, mutated Zarentine. I never imagined the truth could be so horrific. Philip placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Your ancestors did what they thought was right. They tried to fix their mistake, to save the galaxy. And they failed. Theros' voice was heavy with grief. They left the job unfinished, and now it falls to us. The team exchanged glances, the magnitude of their task sinking in. They were no longer just soldiers or explorers. They were the inheritors of a legacy, the last hope for setting right an ancient wrong. Philip turned to face them, his expression grave. We have the key now, the failsafe, but to use it, we have to go to the source, the world where the Krill virus first emerged. A shudder ran through the group. They had all heard the stories of that cursed planet, the nightmarish tales whispered by spacers in darkened bars. A world twisted beyond recognition, where the very air was poison and the ground seethed with monstrous life. I won't lie to you, Philip said, his voice steady. This will be the most dangerous mission we've ever faced. The Krill will be at their strongest there, and will be walking into the heart of their power. But if we succeed, if we can activate the failsafe, we could end this, not just for the Zarentine, but for every living being in the galaxy. He met each of their eyes in turn. I won't order anyone to come with me. This is a volunteer mission, but I'm going, with or without you, for Hernandez, for the Magellan, for every soldier who died fighting these monsters, for everyone. One by one, the team stepped forward. We're with you, sir, Hawkins said, speaking for all of them, to the end. Philip nodded, pride and gratitude warring with the knowledge of what he had to do next. Thank you, all of you. But there's one more thing. He turned to Theros. The failsafe, it can only be activated by Zarentine blood, by you. Theros' eyes widened in understanding. No, Philip, no. You can't mean... I do. Philip's voice was heavy with regret. You have to stay behind, Theros. The Zarentine will need you to rebuild, to lead them. And if I don't make it back... Don't say that, Theros choked out. Don't you dare. Philip gripped his friend's arm. If I don't make it back, the failsafe will be lost with me. The mission will have been for nothing. You have to survive, Theros. You have to be ready, in case... He couldn't finish. Theros pulled him into a fierce embrace, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Come back, he whispered. Swear to me you'll come back. Philip closed his eyes, unable to voice the promise. He knew the odds of what he was about to attempt. But he had to try. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of every friend he'd lost and every innocent soul counting on him, he had to try. Gently, he disengaged from Theros' grasp. He turned to his team, his brothers and sisters in arms. Get to the ship, prep for launch. I'll be along shortly. They filed out, each clasping his shoulder or murmuring words of encouragement as they passed. Soon, only Philip and Theros remained in the ancient chamber, the weight of unspoken goodbyes hanging heavy in the air. Philip, Theros began, but Philip shook his head. Don't, he said softly. Someone, please, don't make this any harder. Theros' jaw clenched, but he nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crystalline device. Take this, he said, pressing it into Philip's hand. It's a Zarentine communicator, quantum entangled. It will work no matter where you are. When you activate the failsafe, I'll know. I'll be able to find you. Philip closed his fingers around the device, the hard edges biting into his palm. Thank you, he managed. There was so much more he wanted to say, but the words stuck in his throat. In the end, he settled for a simple, fierce hug, pouring all his unspoken emotions into the embrace. Then, before he could lose his nerve, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the ancient chamber. He didn't look back, couldn't bear to see the look on Tharos's face. Each step was heavy, weighted with the knowledge of what lay ahead. But Philip's resolve never wavered. He had a mission, a purpose, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. Philip's hands clenched on the controls as his ship plummeted through the roiling clouds of the Creel homeworld's noxious atmosphere. The planet was a nightmarish hellscape, its surface shrouded in perpetual darkness, a twisting labyrinth of organic horrors. Proximity alarms blared as swarms of Krill drones descended on his craft, their chitinous bodies slamming against the hull with sickening thuds. Philip gritted his teeth, fingers flying over the console as he wrenched the ship into evasive maneuvers. Plasma fire streaked past the cockpit, the drone's relentless onslaught threatening to overwhelm his defenses. Philip jinked and wove, his piloting skills pushed to their absolute limit as he navigated through the swarms and the towering spires of twisted flesh that rose from the planet's surface like the fingers of a colossal, grotesque hand. But even his prodigious skills couldn't evade the Krill forever. A drone slammed into his starboard engine, sending the ship into a wild spin. Alarms screamed as systems failed, the ground rushing up to meet him. With a bone-jarring impact, the ship slammed into the spongy, organic surface on the outskirts of what had once been a proud Zarantine city. Now, it was a pulsating hive, teeming with Krill abominations. Philip pushed himself up from the sparking wreckage of the cockpit, his body aching from the brutal landing. But there was no time to nurse his wounds. He was in the heart of enemy territory now, and every second counted. He retrieved the failsafe device from its protective case, the alien technology thrumming with latent power. This was the key to everything, the only hope of undoing the Krill's corruption and saving what remained of the Zarantine. Armed with nothing but his wits and this enigmatic device, Philip set out into the nightmare city. The ground squelched beneath his boots, the very earth alive and writhing. Pulsing veins the size of tree trunks pumped viscous fluids through the hive, and the air was thick with the stench of decay and alien pheromones. Every step was a battle, every moment a test of will. Skittering horrors emerged from fleshy tunnels to bar his path, their maws dripping with caustic slime. Hulking abominations, their bodies a twisted fusion of Zarantine and Krill, lumbered through the pulsating corridors. Philip fought with grim determination, his plasma rifle flaring again and again. The horrors fell before him, but always more came to take their place, an unending tide of nightmare made flesh. And with each step, the true extent of the Krill's corruption became more and more apparent. The walls of the hive pulsed with a grotesque parody of life, and within their membranous folds, Philip could see the remains of the Zarantine. Their bodies were warped and twisted, fused into the very structure of the hive, their once proud forms now little more than building blocks for the Krill's monstrous city. But even amidst this horror, there were glimmers of hope. In some of the creatures he fought, Philip saw flashes of intelligence, of individuality, remnants of the Zarantine's once great civilization, buried beneath layers of genetic corruption and Krill domination. It was a realization that steeled his resolve, that drove him onwards despite the overwhelming odds. The Zarantine were not lost, not completely, and if there was even a chance of saving them, of undoing the Krill's evil, then he had to take it. Deeper and deeper, he pushed into the hive, battling past monstrosities that defied description. Each fight was a desperate struggle for survival, a test of his skills and his sanity. The Krill threw their most fearsome guardians against him, towering behemoths with multiple limbs and maws that dripped with venom, creatures that seemed woven from the stuff of nightmares. Philip fought them all, his body pushed to the limits of endurance, his mind straining against the constant psychic pressure of the hive mind. It was a weight that threatened to crush his will, to subsume him into the Krill's collective consciousness and strip away all that made him human. But he held on, anchoring his sense of self with thoughts of his comrades, of the worlds, and the people depending on him. He pictured Theras's face, the Zarentine's quiet wisdom and unshakable faith. He thought of Hernandez's sacrifice, of the countless soldiers who had given their lives in the war against the Krill. They were his bulwark against the hive mind's relentless onslaught, the foundation upon which he built his resistance. Step by blood-soaked step, Philip fought his way into the very heart of the hive. The fleshy corridors pulsed with malevolent energy, the air thick with the cloying stench of the Krill's corruption. And then, at last, he stood before the inner sanctum, a vast chamber, where the pulsing heart of the Krill's consciousness resided. The walls throbbed with sickly light, and the air hummed with psychic energy. Philip stepped forward, the fail-safe device heavy in his hand. He had come so far, endured so much. Now, at the end of all things, he would face the true architect of the Krill's evil, the Queen herself. But as the Queen materialized before him, Philip realized that this was not the same creature he had faced on the Dreadnought. That had been a physical manifestation, a mere avatar of the Krill's power. This was something else entirely, a being of pure psychic energy, a manifestation of the hive mind's collective will. It was a thing of raw, unfettered power, and as it turned its gaze upon Philip, he felt the full weight of its malevolence bearing down upon him. The battle that followed was like nothing Philip had ever experienced. It was a contest of wills, a psychic duel fought on a plane beyond the physical. The Queen's mind crashed against his own like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away all that he was, all that he had ever been. Philip strained against the onslaught, his every thought, every memory, turned into a weapon in this mental war. He clung to his identity, to his very humanity, with a desperate tenacity, even as the Queen's will threatened to erode it all away. But even as he fought, even as he poured every ounce of his being into resisting the Queen's domination, Philip realized that there was another path. The fail-safe device thrummed in his hand, a reminder of his true purpose here. With a supreme effort of will, Philip lowered his mental defenses, opening his mind to the Queen's psychic probe. But rather than fighting her, rather than trying to shield his thoughts, he let her see. He showed her the truth of the Krill's origins, the tragic history of the Zarentine's downfall. He let her feel the weight of the lives lost, the worlds destroyed by the Krill's relentless hunger. And most of all, he showed her the glimmers of individuality he had seen in her brood, the remnants of the Zarentine's legacy that still persisted, even here, in the heart of the hive. For a moment, the Queen's psychic onslaught faltered. Philip felt a flicker of something in her consciousness, a glimmer of doubt, of regret. It was the tiniest of openings, but it was all he needed. With a final, desperate surge of effort, Philip activated the fail-safe device. A pulse of energy erupted from the alien technology, a wave of psychic force that washed over the Queen and the entire hive. In that instant, everything changed. The Queen reeled back, her psychic form flickering and distorting. Around Philip, the walls of the hive shuddered and convulsed, the Krill's biomechanical structures starting to come apart at the seams. The fail-safe device was more than just a weapon. It was a key, a code that rewrote the very genetic structure of the Krill. It tore apart the corrupted sequences, the malevolent code that had transformed the Zarentine into monsters, and in its place, it restored the original pattern, the true essence of the Zarentine race. Philip watched in awe as the Krill around him began to change. Their twisted forms straightened and realigned, the grotesque fusion of flesh and machine falling away to reveal the sleek, elegant forms of the Zarentine beneath. It was a transformation that spread like wildfire, a wave of change that swept through the entire hive. The Queen herself was not immune. Her psychic form shimmered and condensed, coalescing into a physical body that was achingly familiar. Philip stared into the face of a Zarentine female, her features regal and wise. She looked at him with eyes that held the weight of ages, of a civilization's rise and fall. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody. "You have freed us from an eternity of torment, of enslavement to our own twisted creation." Philip nodded, too exhausted, too overwhelmed to speak. Around him, the hive was crumbling, the krill's structures dissolving into dust as the Zarantine emerged, blinking and confused, into a world they had not seen in millennia. It was over. The war, the nightmare, the endless cycle of horror and destruction. With a single act, Philip had brought it all to an end. But as he stood there amidst the ruins of the krill's empire, he knew that this was only the beginning. The Zarantine had been given a second chance, a new lease on life, and he would be there to help them, to guide them as they rebuilt their civilization and took their rightful place among the stars. For he was Philip, the soldier, the explorer, the defender of life, and his mission, his purpose, would never be over. The failsafe's energy surged through the krill hive, a wave of transformative power that rewrote the very essence of the corrupted Zarantine. Philip watched in awe as the monstrous forms before him began to shift and change, their twisted bodies reshaping into something more akin to their original, uncorrupted state. But the process was far from painless. The hive convulsed around him, the collective psychic scream of the krill consciousness threatening to overwhelm his own mind. Philip gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of his will into maintaining the failsafe's power. "Hold on!" he shouted to the transforming Zarantine, his voice straining over the cacophony of agony. "Just a little longer!" As the transformation reached its zenith, the hive itself began to crumble. The fleshy, pulsating walls sloughed away, revealing the remnants of the ancient Zarantine city beneath. Chunks of biomechanical debris rained down, and Philip found himself dodging and weaving through the chaos, the flailing bodies of the krill-turned Zarantine all around him. "This way!" The queen's voice cut through the tumult, her form now a shimmering beacon in the gloom. She guided him through the collapsing labyrinth, her psychic presence a calm anchor in the storm. Together, they burst from the ruins just as the hive imploded behind them, a final dying gasp of the krill's reign of terror. Philip stumbled to a halt, his lungs heaving, and surveyed the scene before him. Where once had stood a nightmarish hive, now lay the shattered remnants of a city, and amidst those ruins, a sea of disoriented Zarantine. They looked at each other and at their surroundings with a mix of confusion and dawning wonder, as if seeing the world for the first time. The queen, her form now fully restored to its original ethereal grace, stepped forward to address her people. "My children," she began, her voice resonating with a new strength, "we have been given a second chance. A chance to atone for the mistakes of our past, to rebuild what was lost." She spoke of the hubris that had led to their downfall, of the dangers of pursuing power without wisdom, but she also spoke of hope, of the potential for a new beginning. "Let us honor the sacrifice of those who fought to free us," she said, her gaze falling on Philip. "Let us forge a new path, one of peace and unity." As the Zarantine began to pick their way through the ruins, the first tentative steps in their long journey of rebuilding, Philip couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. They had done it. Against all odds, they had broken the cycle of violence and corruption. But even as the Zarantine celebrated their newfound freedom, Philip knew that his work was far from over. The power vacuum left by the krill's defeat was a dangerous thing, and there were many races eager to fill it. If there was to be lasting peace, Philip realized, it would have to be forged through diplomacy, not just warfare. He would have to become a different kind of warrior, one who fought with words and treaties rather than guns and blades. It was a daunting task, but Philip had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He threw himself into his new role with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest days of the war. He shuttled from one corner of the galaxy to another, meeting with leaders and diplomats, working tirelessly to forge new alliances and bridge old divides. It was exhausting work, fraught with political intrigue and ancient grudges. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to make progress. His unique perspective, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by his experiences with the Zarantine and the Krill, allowed him to see past the differences that divided the races, to the common hopes and fears that united them. His crowning achievement came when he managed to broker a historic treaty between the Zarantine and the very race that had once sought to control the Krill. It was a tense negotiation, with both sides forced to confront the painful memories of the past. But Philip's steady hand and unwavering moral compass guided them through, and when the treaty was finally signed, it marked a new era of cooperation and peace in the galaxy. Yet even as the ink was drying on this momentous accord, Philip received an urgent message from his old team. They had uncovered a new threat, one that came not from the stars, but from the heart of humanity itself. A faction of humans, embittered by what they saw as the betrayal of their allies during the Krill War, had been secretly amassing a stockpile of ancient Zarantine bioweapons, weapons capable of rewriting the very fabric of life itself. Their plan was as audacious as it was terrifying, to use these weapons to establish human supremacy over the galaxy, by force if necessary. They believed it was humanity's destiny to rule, and they were prepared to unleash hell to make that destiny a reality. Philip stared at the message in disbelief, his hands clenching into fists. The bioweapons, the very tools of genocide he had fought so hard to destroy, were now in the hands of rogue humans. And worse, they were aided by Zarantine extremists, twisted remnants of the Krill who sought to unleash the same horror on the galaxy that had nearly destroyed their own species. He knew he had to act fast. Every second counted. He reached out to his most trusted comrades, humans who had fought by his side against the Krill, Zarantine who had seen firsthand the devastation the bioweapons could cause, and members of other races who had come to trust in his leadership during the fragile peace that followed. "We have a situation," Philip said, his voice grave as they gathered around the holotable. "A rogue human faction has acquired Zarantine bioweapons. They plan to use them to establish human supremacy over the galaxy." Shocked murmurs rippled through the group. Theros, his Zarantine features etched with worry, spoke up. "How is this possible? I thought all the bioweapons were destroyed." "Apparently not all of them," Philip replied grimly. "And they're not working alone. They've been aided by Zarantine extremists." "Krill sympathizers," Theros spat, disgust in his voice. "They spit on the sacrifices of our people." Philip nodded. "We need to stop them, fast, before they can deploy those weapons." He brought up a holographic display of a remote star system. "Intel suggests the bioweapons are being held here, in a heavily guarded facility hidden in the asteroid belt." "A frontal assault would be suicide," Hawkins pointed out, studying the facility's defenses. "Agreed," Philip said. "That's why we're going in covertly. We'll approach under the guise of a diplomatic envoy. Once inside, we launch a raid to seize control of the facility." He met each of their gazes in turn. "I won't lie to you. This will be dangerous. We'll be outnumbered, fighting in close quarters against both human tech and repurposed Krill bioweapons." A grim silence settled over the room. They all knew the stakes. They had all seen the horror the bioweapons could unleash firsthand. "I'm in," Theros said, his voice firm. "I will not let the mistakes of my people bring more suffering to the galaxy." One by one, the others nodded their assent. They were ready to follow Philip into the fire once more. As they geared up and boarded their ship, Philip couldn't shake the sense of unease that coiled in his gut. This mission felt different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The journey to the remote star system was tense and silent. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, preparing mentally for the battle ahead. As they approached the facility, Philip hailed them on all frequencies. "This is General Philip of the Galactic Peace Coalition. We come on a mission of diplomacy." For a moment, there was only static. Then a gruff voice responded, "Transmit your clearance codes." Philip nodded to Jansen, their tech specialist. She had managed to slice the necessary codes from a high-level communique. He just hoped they hadn't been changed. A tense beat passed, then the voice returned. "Codes verified. You are cleared to dock." Philip let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They were in. The facility's interior was cold and sterile, all gleaming metal and harsh lights. A squad of armed guards met them at the airlock, their faces hard and suspicious. "We weren't informed of any diplomatic mission," the lead guard said, his hand resting on his sidearm. "An urgent matter has arisen," Philip said smoothly. "We must speak with your leadership immediately." The guard hesitated, then gestured for them to follow. As they moved deeper into the facility, Philip and his team exchanged covert glances, their hands drifting closer to their concealed weapons. The trap was set. Now they just needed the right moment to spring it. That moment came as they were led into a large, open chamber. Dozens of guards lined the walkways above, and at the far end, a group of figures stood hunched over a hollow table. Philip recognized the central figure instantly. Admiral Zoran, a hardline human supremacist, who had vocally opposed the peace treaties with the other races. "Admiral Zoran," Philip called out, his voice echoing in the chamber, "we know about the bioweapons." Zoran looked up, his face twisting into a sneer. "Do you now? And what do you plan to do about it, traitor?" Philip's team tensed, ready for action. "We're here to stop you, Zoran. You can't seriously believe using those weapons will lead to anything but more war and suffering." Zoran laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "War is inevitable, Philip. The only question is who will emerge victorious. And with these weapons, that will be humanity." He gestured to the figures around him. Philip saw now that they were Zarantine, but their eyes burned with a fanatic light. "Our Zarantine friends here agree. They understand that the only way to ensure their survival is to align with the strongest power, and that power will be us." Philip shook his head. "You're delusional, Zoran. Can't you see they're using you? They don't care about humanity. They only want revenge." "Enough talk," Zoran snarled. "Guards, eliminate these pests." The room erupted into chaos. Philip and his team dove for cover as a hail of blaster fire filled the air. They returned fire, their weapons barking in the confined space. Philip saw Jansen go down, a blaster bolt searing through her shoulder. Hawkins dragged her to safety, laying down covering fire. Across the room, Theros was a blur of motion, his psionic abilities allowing him to anticipate and dodge the enemy fire. He sent out a pulse of psychic energy, sending a group of guards tumbling from the walkways. But for every guard they felled, more seemed to take their place. They were badly outnumbered, and the enemy had the advantage of higher ground. Philip knew they needed to change the odds, and fast. His eyes fell on a series of large reinforced containers lining the walls, the bioweapons. "Theros!" he shouted over the din of battle. "The containers! We need to secure them!" Theros nodded, already moving. Philip laid down a blistering barrage of cover fire, giving the Zarantine a chance to reach the containers. But as Theros neared the containers, a searing bolt of energy struck one of them. The container ruptured, a cloud of sickly green gas billowing out. Philip watched in horror as the gas enveloped a group of guards. They screamed, their bodies twisting and warping as the bioweapon took hold. "Fall back," Philip ordered, already moving. "Seal your suits. Don't let that stuff touch you." They scrambled back, sealing their environmental suits as the deadly cloud spread. The infected guards stumbled after them, their forms grotesque and swollen. Philip's heart raced as they fought their way through the facility, the bioweapon plague spreading behind them like a relentless tide. They had to reach the control room to find a way to contain the outbreak before it consumed the entire base. But as they rounded a corner, they found their path blocked by a group of Zarantine extremists, led by a figure Philip recognized all too well. "Zoran!" Philip growled, raising his weapon. But Zoran only laughed, a sound tinged with madness. "You're too late, Philip. The purge has already begun. Soon the galaxy will be cleansed of the weak, and the strong will inherit the stars." Philip stared at the man, seeing in him a twisted reflection of himself. A man so consumed by bitterness and hate that he was willing to burn the galaxy to ashes. "It doesn't have to be this way, Zoran," Philip said, his voice pleading. "We can still stop this. We can find another way." But Zoran only sneered. There is no other way. This is the only path to true peace. A peace born of strength, not weakness. With a roar of fury, he charged at Philip, his blade flashing. Philip met him head-on, their weapons clashing in a spray of sparks. As they dueled, the plague continued to spread. Philip saw members of his own team succumb, their bodies twisting into monstrous shapes. He felt the virus coursing through his own veins, the bioweapon he had been infected with during the fighting. But he refused to give in. With a final, desperate effort, he disarmed Zoran, sending the man's blade skittering across the floor. "It's over, Zoran," Philip panted, his weapon leveled at the man's chest. "Surrender!" But Zoran only laughed, a sound tinged with despair. "You've won nothing, Philip. The plague is loose. We're all dead men now." With a snarl of rage, Philip knocked the man unconscious with a swift blow to the head. He turned to his remaining team members, his face grim. "We need to get to the control room. We have to initiate the facility's self-destruct sequence. It's the only way to make sure this plague doesn't spread further." They fought their way through the remaining extremists, the virus weakening them with every step. By the time they reached the control room, only a handful of them remained standing. Philip staggered to the control panel, his vision blurring. He inputted the self-destruct codes, his fingers fumbling on the keys. "You need to go," he said to his team, his voice a rasp. "Get to the ship. Get as far away from here as you can." "What about you?" Theros asked, his face stricken. Philip smiled sadly. "Someone has to stay behind to make sure the job gets done." Tears in their eyes, his team clasped his hand one last time, then they were gone, racing for the ship. Philip slumped against the control panel, his strength fading. He reached for the comm, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is General Philip," he said, his voice a whisper. "The bioweapon threat has been neutralized, but the cost was high." He took a shuddering breath. "To all those who can hear me, know this. The fight for peace, for understanding, for unity, it's not over. It falls to you now, to carry on the work we started." He closed his eyes, a smile on his face. "It has been an honor to serve alongside all of you. Remember, even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Always." With a final effort, he pressed the activation button. Alarms blared, a countdown beginning. As the facility shook and crumbled around him, Philip thought of all those he had fought for, all those he had lost. He thought of Theros, of Hernandez, of the countless souls who had given their lives in the pursuit of a better tomorrow. "I'm coming home," he whispered. "I'm coming home." The facility exploded, a searing light that lit the stars, and in that light, a hero found peace at last. The facility's destruction rent the fabric of space and time, the anomaly's kaleidoscopic energies swirling like a maelstrom where the bioweapon lab once stood. Commander Hawkins, now leading Philip's team in the wake of his sacrifice, set the shuttle down at the edge of the disturbance. As they disembarked onto the scarred earth, the weight of their loss pressed down on them like a physical force. Philip's absence was a gaping wound, his steady presence and unwavering moral compass sorely missed. "Stay sharp," Hawkins ordered, his voice rough with grief he refused to show. "Scanners are useless in this mess. We do this the old-fashioned way." They picked their way through the debris field, the twisted remnants of the facility jutting from the ground like the bones of some long-dead leviathan. The anomaly pulsed and shimmered, casting eerie shadows across the desolate landscape. Theros, his Zarantine features etched with sorrow, paused before a warped girder. "I can feel it," he murmured. "The echoes of what happened here, the choices we made, the prices we paid." As if in response, the anomaly flickered. Suddenly, they were no longer alone. Spectral figures moved among the wreckage, translucent and silent. Hawkins recognized the scenes playing out before them, moments from their past, from the war against the Krill. There was Hernandez, his body broken but his spirit undefeated, urging Philip on in his final moments. The Krill Queen loomed, her form a nightmarish fusion of flesh and machine. And there, always at the center, was Philip himself, facing each challenge with unwavering resolve. "What is this?" Jansen whispered, her eyes wide. "Memories," Theros said softly. "The anomaly is reacting to our presence, to our connection to this place and time." As they pushed deeper into the heart of the disturbance, each member of the team found themselves confronted by their own personal phantoms. Failures and regrets long buried surged to the surface, given form by the anomaly's uncanny energies. Hawkins saw himself on the bridge of the Magellan, arguing for retreat while Philip rallied them to stand and fight. Jansen relived the moment her tech skills failed, the Krill's viral attack nearly dooming them all. Each of them faced the darkest parts of themselves, the choices they wished they could unmake. At the center of the anomaly, they found the shattered remains of the bioweapon containment unit. But of Philip's body, there was no sign. Instead, hovering in the air before them, was a small, pulsing globe of light. As they approached, the globe expanded, resolving into a flickering holographic image. It was Philip, his features worn but his eyes bright with the same fierce determination they had always known. "If you're seeing this," the recording began, "then I didn't make it. But the mission, our mission, is bigger than any one of us." As Philip's final words washed over them, the team felt a shift within themselves. The doubts and recriminations that had plagued them began to fall away, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Philip spoke of the potential he saw in all of them, in all species. He reminded them of the bonds they had forged, the understanding they had fought so hard to achieve. In the face of the challenges to come, he urged them to hold fast to those ideals, to be the light in the darkness. As the message ended, the anomaly began to dissipate, the wreckage of the facility resolving back into cold, hard reality. But something had changed. The team emerged from the heart of the disturbance, their grief tempered by a newfound resolve. They had a long road ahead of them. The galaxy was fractured, old wounds reopened by the struggle against the rogue humans and their Zarantine allies. The Zarantine themselves, still haunted by the specter of the Krill, teetered on the brink of a new isolationism. But Philip's team would not let his dream die. They returned to the galactic stage, using Philip's final message as a rallying cry. In council chambers and on battlefields, they worked tirelessly to rekindle the spirit of unity that had carried them through the darkest days of the war. It was a fight that would define a generation. There were setbacks and moments of despair, times when the old prejudices seemed insurmountable. But slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to heal. In the end, Philip's true legacy was not the battles he had won or the enemies he had defeated. It was the idea he had championed, the belief in a galaxy united not by fear or force, but by compassion and cooperation. And though he was gone, his presence lingered in the hearts of all those who had known him. In the Zarantine's newfound openness, in the humans' hard-won humility, in every act of kindness and understanding between once bitter enemies, Philip's spirit endured. The galaxy he had dreamed of was still out there, waiting to be born. And with each passing day, with each small victory over the forces of division and mistrust, it drew a little closer.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.